Medical records exist that were buried for over 130 years. Birth certificates that 19th century doctors refused to complete because what emerged from the wombs of Henderson women challenged not just medicine but the very definition of humanity. In October 1892, in rural Marion County, Kansas, the last descendant of the Henderson family gave birth to something that forced the permanent closure of the local medical practice. Ezekiel Morrison, who had delivered babies for 30 years on the American frontier, abandoned medicine that same day. His journals, discovered in 1987 buried in an iron box behind his former home, contained only one sentence about that birth: "May God forgive what I witnessed, and may my soul be spared from remembering." The ink of his final medical notes had been written with trembling hands, and modern forensic analysis revealed it wasn't ordinary ink. It was a mixture of graphite with coagulated blood. Dr. Morrison had literally bled his words onto paper, as if the very act of documenting what he saw was a form of necessary self-harm. Mary Henderson was 19 years old when she carried the last child of the cursed lineage. Like her sisters, cousins, and mother before her, Mary had never been with any man. Later medical examinations confirmed she maintained physical signs of virginity until the moment of birth. Like all Henderson women born after 1845, she had been visited by the nocturnal beings that haunted the family property since her ancestors performed what they called the fertility summoning ritual. But the child, if we can call it that Mary Henderson brought into the world in 1892 was different from all the other aberrations born in the family over the previous 47 years. This one didn't live just a few days like the others. This one survived, grew, and developed capabilities that defied not just biology but the very laws of known physics. When federal authorities finally arrived at the Henderson farm in December 1892, they found something that forced them to create a new national security classification, a category that remains active today and has never been publicly revealed. What they found wasn't just a genetic aberration, it was the first of a new life form. The Henderson case files were sealed by the United States War Department in 1893, transferred to military custody under the new category Project Nocturne, and later absorbed into anomalous phenomena files when what would later become the CIA was established in 1947. For 131 years, these documents remained under the highest national security classification, accessible only to a handful of specialists with presidential authorization. A breach in automatic declassification protocols, resulting from a programming error in the digital archive system, resulted in the accidental release of 847 pages of Henderson files in January 2024. The error was detected and corrected within 72 hours, but not before independent researchers managed to download and preserve the documents on distributed servers around the world. This is the first time the truth about the Henderson lineage and their nocturnal visitors is being publicly revealed. And what these documents reveal goes far beyond an isolated case of anomalous births. They expose a national pattern of non-human interference in human reproduction that may have permanently altered our species. The Henderson family arrived in Kansas in 1844, part of the Great Westward Migration that followed the Oregon and Santa Fe trails. Jeremiah Henderson, a farmer of Scottish origin who had lost his property in Illinois due to debts contracted during the Panic of 1837, had purchased 320 acres of land near what is now the town of Hillsborough, Kansas, for a suspiciously low price, less than 1/10 the value of similar properties in the region. The seller, a Franco-Canadian fur trader named William Blackfeather, who had married a Kansa tribe woman and learned their traditions, had explicitly warned Jeremiah about the peculiarities of the land. According to county registry records preserved in Marion County archives, Blackfeather wrote an unusual clause in the deed of sale. The buyer is warned that this land was sacred territory of the Kansa tribe, specifically used for fertility rituals that, according to ancestral traditions, attracted entities from other worlds to seed new forms of life. It is recommended to avoid any activity that might awaken such presences, especially rituals performed during new moons. Jeremiah Henderson, a devout Presbyterian Christian raised in the Calvinist rigidity of Scotland, dismissed the warning as pagan superstition. He built his wooden and stone house exactly in the center of a circle of ancient stones he found on the property, stones arranged in a perfect geometric pattern that he believed to be just a curious natural formation. His decision to build there was more than practical, it was a declaration of faith. He was, as he wrote in a letter to his brother in Scotland, claiming the land for Christ and banishing any vestige of demonic paganism. Problems began in the harsh winter of 1845. Jeremiah's wife, Martha Henderson, a 23-year-old woman who had married at 16 and desperately tried to conceive for 7 years without success, was being consumed by the social shame of her sterility. In 19th century rural society, a woman who couldn't bear children was seen as cursed by God, or worse still, as carrying some hidden sin. Desperate and ignoring her husband's objections, Martha consulted a local healer, Sarah Crow Woman, one of the last Kansa indigenous people who had remained in the region after the forced removal of her tribe to Indian Territory in 1840. Sarah Crow Woman lived in an isolated cabin on the banks of the Cottonwood River, surviving as a midwife for pioneer women who couldn't afford trained doctors. Sarah Crow Woman immediately recognized the location of the Henderson farm when Martha described the stone circle. It was the Circle of the Night Call, a place where her tribe performed fertility rituals only during extreme emergencies, when tribal survival depended on births. These rituals, according to Kansa oral traditions, opened portals between worlds so that the ancient Night Fathers would come to seed new forms of life in sterile women. The healer warned Martha about the dangers, explaining that the ancient fathers were not benevolent spirits, but hungry entities that demanded payment for their services, a payment that extended through generations. But Martha, consumed by the desperation of being sterile and by social pressure to be seen as an incomplete woman, insisted on performing the ritual. On a new moon night in February 1845, with the temperature at 15 degrees below zero and cutting winds sweeping across the plains, Martha Henderson meticulously executed Sarah Crow Woman's instructions. She stripped completely naked and lay in the exact center of the stone circle, on frozen ground that should have been intolerable for bare skin, but which she described as strangely warm, as if pulsing with its own life. She burned a specific mixture of herbs, wild mandrake roots, sacred tobacco, and something Sarah Crow Woman called only blood of the earth, a dark, oily substance that the healer had extracted from a nearby cave. The herbs produced thick, dark smoke that didn't disperse with the wind, but concentrated in a vertical column that seemed to pierce the clouds. Martha recited invocations in a language she didn't understand, guttural words that seemed to tear her throat when pronounced. According to her detailed diary, discovered in 1987, hidden in the walls of the old Henderson house, the words came from my mouth, but they weren't mine. It was as if something inside me had known this language for a long time, waiting only for the opportunity to speak. What happened that night would forever change not just the Henderson lineage, but potentially human evolution in the region. Martha described in terrifying detail that dark forms emerged from the very shadows taller than any man, with limbs that stretched like dry tree branches during storms. Their eyes were like negative stars, points of absolute darkness that sucked the light around them, creating vortices of darkness where there should have been pupils. When they touched me, she continued, it was as if ice and fire ran simultaneously through my veins. It wasn't a sexual touch as we know between humans. It was something deeper and more terrible, as if these entities were rewriting something fundamental in my body, altering not just my ability to reproduce, but the very nature of what I could reproduce. Martha Henderson became pregnant immediately after the ritual, but her gestation was marked by anomalies that terrorized even experienced doctors of the American frontier. The fetus moved in ways that defied human anatomy, creating pointed protuberances that projected through Martha's skin as if multiple beings with rigid skeletons were fighting inside her womb. Dr. Caleb Pritchard, the local doctor who had studied medicine at Harvard University and served as a surgeon during the Mexican-American War, had never witnessed anything similar in his career. His medical notes, preserved in county archives, describe a gestation that seemed to follow completely different biological rules. The fetus presents impossible mobility, he wrote. During examinations, I can feel what appear to be multiple independent structures moving in a coordinated manner. Sometimes Miss Henderson presents protuberances in her abdomen that suggest forms with impossible joints, as if what is growing inside her possessed more joints than any known vertebrate. The child, born in November 1845, lived only 6 days but left indelible marks on all who witnessed it. Dr. Pritchard noted in his medical records that the child possessed limbs that voluntarily elongated and contracted, as if made of a malleable substance controlled by its own will. Its eyes were completely black, without trace of white sclera or colored iris, and when it looked at someone, the person reported a sensation of deep cold that penetrated to the bones and remained for hours after visual contact. More disturbing was that the child seemed to understand complex conversations despite never emitting vocal sounds. When adults discussed its condition, Its black eyes moved between speakers as if following every word. And on the rare occasions when it smiled, it revealed a mouth with more teeth than normal, small and pointed, arranged in multiple rows like those of a shark. Over the next 20 years, Martha had 5 more children through annual nocturnal visitations. All presented similar but evolutionary deformities: limbs that changed proportion according to the child's will, completely black eyes that glowed slightly in the dark, and a characteristic that terrorized all who saw them: the ability to contort their heads at angles of up to 270 degrees, as if their cervical vertebrae were articulated like those of owls, but with conscious control. The Henderson children, who survived infancy, 3 of the 6 born, grew to become physically functional adults, but marked by characteristics that isolated them from the local community. All were abnormally tall. Men reached 2.10 meters, women 1.90 meters, and thin, with joints that flexed well beyond normal human limits. Their elbows could bend backward, their fingers curved in complete spirals, and their necks rotated with impossible amplitude. Their pupils reacted inversely to light, dilating completely in brightness and contracting until almost disappearing in darkness, as if their nervous systems operated under principles opposite to normal humans. During the day, they wore dark glasses or wide-brimmed hats to hide this disturbing characteristic. More unsettling was their reproductive behavior, which established the pattern that would define the Henderson lineage for decades. Henderson women never needed male partners to become pregnant. During their first menstruations, always during new moons, they were visited by the same shadowy beings that Martha had originally invoked. Rebecca Henderson, Martha's daughter, described her first visitation in 1867 in a diary discovered by federal investigators. "They come when the moon is dead, and the shadows become thicker than darkness itself. They don't walk afloat a few centimeters above the ground, and where their feet should touch the earth, the grass withers instantly. Their faces have no defined features, only cavities where eyes, nose, and mouth should be, but somehow they see, breathe, and communicate directly with our minds." Henderson men, in turn, developed an irresistible compulsion to remain single and violently protect the family women. They never married or maintained relationships with women outside the lineage, as if some deep instinct prevented them from contaminating the genetic experiment being conducted through their sisters and cousins. Dr. Pritchard meticulously documented all Henderson births between 1850 and 1875, the year of his death, from what he himself described as spiritual exhaustion. His records, preserved in Marion County archives, show a consistent and terrifying pattern. All Henderson children were born with characteristics that became more pronounced and more alien with each generation. The deformities didn't diminish over time or stabilize. They evolved in a directed manner, as if each birth were a calculated step towards something specific. Dr. Pritchard wrote in his final notes, "I am not observing genetic degeneration, but engineering. Some intelligence is systematically molding this family lineage toward a goal I cannot comprehend, but which I deeply fear." Mary Henderson was born in 1873, daughter of Rebecca Henderson and granddaughter of Martha, representing the 3rd generation of the modified lineage. Like all Henderson women, Mary developed distinctive physical characteristics during puberty that clearly marked her as different: excessive height, reaching 1.83 meters at 16 years old, hypermobile joints that flexed at impossible angles, and eyes that changed color depending on lighting, light brown during the day, but completely black at night. During her development, Mary also manifested abilities that no previous generation had demonstrated. She could remain motionless for hours without discomfort, breathing so subtly that she seemed dead. Domestic animals instinctively avoided her miters. Horses reared when she approached, dogs howled and hid, and cats refused to enter any environment where she was present. More disturbing was her relationship with darkness. Mary didn't just prefer dark environments, she seemed to be nourished by them. During the day, her skin became pale and waxy, but at night she gained a healthy pink tone. She slept during daylight hours and remained active from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m., a pattern she maintained since childhood. At 18, Mary experienced her first visitation, and according to her personal diary discovered in federal archives and written in handwriting that changed style as the pages progressed, the experience was more intense and detailed than any reported by previous generations. "They were no longer just shadows as Mom and Grandma described," she wrote. "Now I could see them clearly, as if my eyes had been modified to perceive their true form. They were like human skeletons, stretched and elongated, covered by translucent, dark skin that pulsed with veins containing not blood, but a luminous, cold substance. Their arms extended to the ground even when standing, and their fingers ended in claws that seemed to be made of organic metal. Their faces, she continued, were the most terrible. They had no nose or mouth in the human sense, only cavities where eyes should be, holes that extended infinitely into their heads, as if they were portals to absolute void. But somehow, through these cavities, they saw me more clearly than any human had ever seen me. Mary's pregnancy was obsessively documented by Dr. Ezekiel Morrison, who had assumed medical care of the Henderson family after the sudden death of Dr. Pritchard in 1875. Morrison graduated from the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine and, experienced in complex medical cases of the frontier, quickly realized this gestation was radically different from the family's previous ones. The fetus grew accelerated in the first 3 months. Mary gained 15 kilograms in abdominal weight in just 12 weeks, then stabilized at a size that seemed physically impossible for the human uterus to contain. At 6 months of gestation, Mary's abdomen was the typical size of a twin pregnancy at term, but manual examination suggested the presence of only one fetus. More alarming were the fetal movements, which Dr. Morrison described as completely anomalous. Mary reported sensations of multiple creatures moving independently within her, but in a coordinated manner, as if they were parts of a larger organism being assembled internally. During physical examinations, Dr. Morrison could feel through Mary's abdominal wall what he described as at least 3 distinct forms with different density and texture. Sometimes, he noted, I can feel something that appears to be a normal-sized head. At other times, in the same location, there's something elongated and hard like bone, and frequently I detect movements that suggest multiple limbs moving in patterns that don't correspond to known human anatomy. Physical changes in Mary during pregnancy were even more dramatic than in previous generations. Her skin developed a translucency that allowed seeing networks of dark veins running under the surface, veins that pulsed at different rhythms from her heartbeat, as if multiple circulatory systems operated simultaneously in her body. Her nails grew until they became functional 5-centimeter claws, curved and pointed, that she was unable to cut. Any attempt resulted in excruciating pain and bleeding that wouldn't coagulate. She developed a total aversion to sunlight that went beyond discomfort. Direct sun exposure caused blisters and burns on her skin within minutes. More disturbing was that Mary began communicating in languages she had never learned. During sleep, she spoke fluently in dialects that later linguists would identify as archaic variations of languages dead for centuries. And during the day, when questioned about these nocturnal speeches, she had no memory of them. Dr. Morrison made an observation in his final notes that would become prophetic. It's as if Mary weren't carrying a child, but incubating something that was being meticulously constructed by forces operating according to biological principles, completely alien to human medicine. I fear this pregnancy will not result in birth, in the conventional sense, but in emergence, as if something were about to hatch. On October 13, 1892, during a storm that local residents described as supernatural in its intensity and patterns, Mary Henderson went into labor. The storm had begun exactly at midnight and followed impossible meteorological behaviors. Lightning struck continuously around the Henderson property at exactly 7-second intervals, but never directly hit the house or any structure on the farm. Dr. Morrison arrived at the Henderson property at 3 a.m. to find Mary in a state that defied his medical understanding and questioned everything he had learned about human physiology. Labor had begun 3 days earlier, but Mary showed no signs of pain, exhaustion, or fetal distress. Instead, she seemed to be in a kind of deep trance, her eyes completely black and fixed on something only she could see. She murmurs constantly, Dr. Morrison noted, in a language that sounds ancient and guttural, with consonants that seem to tear her throat when pronounced. The words echo through the house anomalously, as if the very walls were amplifying and modifying the sounds. I tried to wake her several times, but she seems to be conscious at a level I cannot reach. What most disturbed Dr. Morrison was that Mary seemed to be giving birth at regular intervals, but always to separate parts, as if something complex was being constructed externally during the process. First emerged 2 structures that appeared to be limbs, he documented, but articulated in ways I've never seen in human or animal anatomy. Each arm possessed 3 main joints and ended in a hand with 7 fingers, each capable of bending in impossible directions. 4 hours later came what appeared to be a torso, but with multiple cavities where internal organs should be, as if the interior were hollow or organized completely differently from human anatomy. The skin was translucent like Mary's during pregnancy, but with a texture that seemed more mineral than organic. The construction process continued for 18 hours, each new part emerging as if it were a piece of a complex biological machine being assembled according to a specific design. Morrison realized he wasn't witnessing a birth, but a form of organic manufacturing that followed principles completely alien to human reproduction. When the process finally completed at sunrise on October 14th, what rose before Dr. Morrison was not a child in the conventional sense of the word. It was an entity that seemed to have been designed and built with specific purpose, incorporating anatomical elements that didn't belong to any known terrestrial life form. The torso was humanoid in basic structure, but elongated and with proportions that suggested different function from human. The limbs extended in impossible proportions. The arms were long enough to touch the ground when the entity was erect, and the legs were articulated in ways that allowed movements in directions that would break human bones. The hands were perhaps the most disturbing aspect. Each possessed 7 fingers of different lengths, all ending in points that weren't exactly nails or claws, but something intermediate structures that seemed capable of hardening or softening as needed. The fingers moved independently, each capable of rotating 360 degrees and curving in complete spirals. The entity's head maintained vaguely human form, but was covered by translucent skin that revealed a complex cranial structure, as if multiple smaller skulls were fused into one, creating internal compartments visible through the skin, where eyes should be. There were deep cavities that extended far beyond what would be anatomically possible, creating the impression of tunnels lost in infinite darkness. But it was when the entity moved that Dr. Morrison understood he wasn't observing a deformity resulting from inbreeding or genetic mutation, but something intentionally designed by non-human intelligence. The creature rose immediately after birth, its limbs adjusting fluidly to find balance positions that should be impossible for a newborn. It didn't emit vocal sounds in the human sense, but produced a constant vibration that emanated from its entire body structure. A sound Dr. Morrison described as similar to the buzzing of a bee swarm, but at frequencies that made my bones vibrate and my teeth ache. The entity immediately demonstrated capabilities that contradicted everything Dr. Morrison knew about neonatal development. It moved with perfect coordination, its eyeless eyes followed movement and seemed to focus on specific objects, and most disturbing of all, it reacted to the doctor's presence with what could only be described as intellectual recognition. It looked directly at me, Dr. Morrison wrote, or seemed to look despite having no eyes in the conventional sense. In that moment, I felt an invasive presence in my mind, as if something were examining my thoughts and memories with the same clinical precision I would apply to examining a patient. It was then I understood that this entity was not the final result of some primitive ritual. It was just the first of a new species. If you're still able to follow this story without pausing or closing the video, you possess mental resistance above the population average. Tell us in the comments, do you believe there are rituals capable of opening portals between dimensions and invoking entities from other worlds to alter our reality? Because what happened next will test the limits of what you consider possible. Unlike previous Henderson children who died within days or weeks, this entity not only survived, thrived and grew in ways that defied all biological laws known to 19th century science. In just 3 weeks, it had doubled in size, its limbs elongating and strengthening in ways that seemed to operate according to physical principles, different from those governing human or animal growth. Dr. Morrison visited daily to document the creature's development, and his observations revealed a growth pattern he described as geometrically precise, as if following a specific mathematical formula. The entity didn't grow organically and irregularly like normal biological organisms, but expanded proportionally, maintaining the exact same anatomical proportions while increasing in size. More puzzling was its nutrition. The entity didn't require traditional feeding, neither breast milk nor any organic substance Dr. Morrison offered. Instead, it absorbed nutrients directly from the soil when lying on bare earth, creating a circle of desiccation around it where the very soil became sterile and gray. I observed it lying in the garden for 4 hours, Dr. Morrison noted, and when it rose there was a perfect circle of approximately 2 meters in diameter where all vegetation had withered and the earth had become arid. More disturbing still, I collected samples of this soil and discovered it was not only devoid of nutrients, but seemed to have been drained of some vital essence I cannot identify or measure with available instruments. More unsettling was its relationship with other life forms. Henderson farm animals died not from injury or disease, but from something Dr. Morrison described as instantaneous and complete desiccation when the entity approached them. Horses, cows, pigs, and chickens simply collapsed when it passed within 5 meters, their bodies mummifying within minutes as if all moisture and vital energy had been sucked out. The entity demonstrated intelligence that transcended any human infantile or even adult capacity. It understood complex instructions given in English, German, the language some German colonists in the region spoke, and even Latin phrases Dr. Morrison occasionally tested. More impressive, it manipulated objects with precision, suggesting advanced understanding of physics and engineering. I observed it constructing structures with stones and sticks, Dr. Morrison documented, creating towers and bridges that follow architectural principles not taught to it. The constructions are geometrically perfect and demonstrate understanding of balance, tension, and weight distribution that rivals trained engineers. Perhaps more disturbing was its ability to anticipate events. The entity always positioned itself strategically before visitors arrived at the property, as if it knew of their approach hours in advance. When storms approached, it moved to shelters before any meteorological signs were visible, and when Dr. Morrison secretly planned to bring specific equipment to examine it, it was already prepared for the tests as if it had read his thoughts. The entity's presence affected the entire surrounding region in ways that defied scientific explanation and terrorized even the most resistant farmers of the Kansas frontier. Within a 15-kilometer radius around the Henderson property, farmers reported that their animals categorically refused to graze or even look in the direction of the Henderson farm. "My horses reared and refused to follow any road leading toward that place," reported Wilhelm Hoffman, a German immigrant whose property was 8 kilometers from the Hendersons. "And when the wind blew from that direction, my cattle crowded in the farthest corner of the pasture and lowed throughout the night, as if sensing a predator's presence." More concerning was the effect on pregnant women in the region. Between October and December 1892, 3 women in Marion County spontaneously miscarried during their 2nd and 3rd trimesters, all on dates that corresponded exactly to the entity's most intense growth phases. The aborted fetuses presented minor but consistent deformities. All possessed extra joints in their fingers and cervical vertebrae in greater number than normal. 4 other women who maintained their pregnancies to term gave birth to children that, although apparently normal, presented subtle but disturbing characteristics. All were born with pupils that reacted inversely to light and brightness and contracting in darkness, and demonstrated joint flexibility that went beyond normal human limits. "The children born in this period are strange," observed Reverend Samuel Tucker, local Methodist pastor, in his Sunday sermons. "They don't cry like normal babies. They make sounds that resemble singing in languages I don't recognize. And when they look at you, there's an intensity in their eyes that shouldn't exist in newborns." The physical environment around the Henderson property had changed measurably. Reverend Tucker meticulously documented these alterations in a series of letters to the Methodist bishop in Topeka, letters discovered in church archives and later included in classified federal documents. "The air has become heavy," he wrote, "not just in a meteorological sense, but as if charged with a tangible presence that doesn't belong to this world. Thermometers show normal temperatures, but all people report constant sensation of cold that penetrates through any amount of clothing. Birds don't fly over that land," he continued. "Flocks approaching the Henderson property abruptly change direction, as if there were an invisible barrier preventing them from proceeding. Wind seems to avoid that place. During storms, we can see whirlwinds and air currents curving around the farm as if it were a stone in a stream. During certain nights, when the moon was in new phase, regional residents reported seeing lights moving through the Henderson property fields, not lights from lanterns or fires, but luminosities that pulsed like beating hearts, changing color between deep blue and sickly green." Dr. Morrison, who had been skeptical about supernatural reports early in his medical career, began making daily visits to the property not just out of professional necessity, but due to a compulsion he couldn't explain or resist. "I feel a magnetic attraction toward the creature," he admitted in his private notes, "as if it were emitting some kind of field that affects my conscious will. When I'm away from the Henderson property, I can think clearly about the horrible implications of what I'm witnessing. But when I approach that place, my mind becomes focused only on observing and documenting, as if my scientific purpose were being amplified and my capacity for moral judgment were being suppressed." More disturbing still, Dr. Morrison began dreaming about the entity when he wasn't at the property. "It appears in my dreams," he wrote. Not as a terrible creature, but as a teacher. It shows me things. Anatomy diagrams that don't correspond to any known species, mathematical formulas that seem to describe relationships between physical dimensions, and star maps and configurations that don't exist in our night sky. When I wake, I vaguely remember these lessons, but when I try to recall them completely or write them down, they fade like smoke. On December 8, 1892, exactly 2 months after the Henderson entity's birth, a United States Army unit arrived in Marion County, Kansas, in an operation officially classified as investigation of reports of hostile indigenous activity in the region. The classified military documentation reveals the true nature of the mission was completely different. They had been dispatched after a series of alarming reports sent by Reverend Samuel Tucker directly to Governor Lorenzo Krauts. Reports immediately forwarded to the War Department in Washington due to what authorities described as national security implications of indeterminate nature. Major Theodore Blackwood, a Civil War veteran and Indian campaigns officer who commanded the special unit, arrived at the Henderson property accompanied by a civilian identified only as Dr. Edmund Whitmore, Miss Department of War Anomalous Phenomena Specialist. Later documents revealed Dr. Whitmore was actually one of the first investigators of what would eventually become the Military Paranormal Research Program. Military documents, written in the technical and emotion-free language typical of official reports, describe what they found at the Henderson farm as a biologically impossible entity of indeterminate origin, presenting characteristics that represent potential threat to national security and regional social stability. Major Blackwood's official report, dated December 10, 1892, contains descriptions that seem like science fiction but were written with the factual precision of an experienced military officer. The entity, then approximately 8 weeks of existence, but presenting physical development equivalent to a 16-year-old human adolescent, offered no resistance when our unit implemented containment procedures. Its apparent cooperation was more disturbing than any hostility could have been. Dr. Whitmore conducted a series of tests he later classified as definitive confirmation of non-terrestrial or alternate dimensional origin. The creature possessed no thermal signature detectable by period instruments. Thermometers showed ambient temperatures when directed at it, as if its body neither generated nor retained heat. Its cellular structure, examined through microscope, didn't correspond to any life form known to contemporary science. The cells, Dr. Whitmore noted, appear to be crystalline in basic structure but demonstrate organic properties. They organize in perfect geometric patterns instead of the irregular formations typical of biological tissue. More unsettling, when observed for prolonged periods, the cells seem to reorganize consciously, as if aware of being examined. Tests with rudimentary electrical detection equipment of the era revealed the entity emitted electromagnetic fields at frequencies that didn't exist in the known spectrum. Instruments that function perfectly in other applications, Dr. Whitmore documented, produce impossible readings when directed at the creature. Compasses spin constantly when near it, pocket watches stop or accelerate, and photographic devices produce distorted images as if light itself behaved differently in its presence. Mary Henderson died exactly 72 hours after the entity's removal, officially from multiple organ failure resulting from postpartum complications. But Dr. Morrison, who was authorized to examine the body before burial, documented evidence suggesting a completely different cause. "There are no signs of disease or trauma," he wrote in his final report. "All of Miss Henderson's internal organs are intact and apparently healthy. However, her body presents complete desiccation, as if all moisture and vital energy had been drained. It's as if she had been mummified from the inside out, but without use of any known chemical process." Mary Henderson's 2 remaining brothers, Jacob, 23, and Thomas, 21, disappeared the same night Mary died. Their beds were unmade, their clothes remained in their wardrobes, and there were no signs of struggle or voluntary departure. They simply ceased to exist physically, as if they had dissolved into air. Extensive searches conducted by the military unit found no traces of the Henderson brothers. More strangely, people in the region began gradually losing any clear memory about Jacob and Thomas. "It's as if they were being retroactively erased from reality," Dr. Morrison observed. Neighbors who had known them for years began questioning whether they really existed. Dr. Morrison was transferred to a military facility at Fort Leavenworth, where he remained under what classified documents describe as protective custody for specialized witness preservation until his death in 1923. During those 31 years, he produced over 2,000 pages of detailed reports about his observations of the Henderson family, documents that became the foundation for military protocols for anomalous phenomena containment. His personal diaries and complete medical records were confiscated and immediately classified under the new category Project Nocturne, created specifically to archive cases related to non-human entities. The Henderson property was purchased by the federal government for environmental conservation purposes through a transaction involving values well above market price. Major Blackwood's final report, dated December 15, 1892, contained a recommendation that would become standard protocol for similar cases. Permanent surveillance of all sites with documented history of indigenous ritual activity related to fertility and entity invocation is recommended. Evidence strongly suggests similar practices may be occurring in other regions of the national territory, potentially producing similar or more advanced results. The entity was transferred to Alpha Containment Facility, the report continued, where it will remain under continuous scientific observation. Establishment of long-term research program is recommended to determine entity's dimensional origin, methods for replicating the creation process, military potential of demonstrated capabilities, and development of countermeasures in case hostile similar entities are produced by foreign powers. The Henderson entity was officially declared dead from congenital complications in Marion County public records. But confidential military documents indicated not only remained alive in government facilities, but continued growing and developing more advanced capabilities for at least 3 decades after its capture. The files accidentally released in January 2024 reveal that the Henderson case was not an isolated incident, but part of a national pattern the federal government had been secretly monitoring since the 1890s. Between 1890 and 1920, at least 23 entity incidents were documented and investigated by military units specialized in rural properties built over former Native American sacred sites. All followed frighteningly similar patterns: desperate colonists performing fertility rituals at indigenous ceremonial sites, subsequent generations of anomalous births, and eventually the emergence of hybrid entities that defied known biological classification. Documents reveal a conspiracy of silence that extended through multiple presidential administrations and government departments. More disturbing is the revelation that some of these entities not only survived in military containment for decades, but reproduced asexually, creating generations of hybrids under government supervision. Reports from 1947 make specific reference to second and third generation Henderson specimens active in 3 different military facilities: Fort Detrick, Maryland, Los Alamos, New Mexico, and an unnamed underground facility in the Nevada desert. Documents from 1963, during the height of the Cold War, describe controlled hybridization experiments using genetic material collected from the original entities. The apparent objective was to determine if the capabilities demonstrated by the entities, including extrasensory perception, electromagnetic field manipulation, and nuclear radiation resistance, could be transferred to human soldiers. Project Nocturne Phase 3, a 1968 memorandum, details attempts to create human entity hybrids through artificial insemination in female military volunteers. Results were classified as catastrophic failure after 3 deaths and 2 emergences of uncontrollable entities requiring immediate elimination. Modern analyses of soil samples from the original Henderson property, secretly conducted by the EPA in 2019 using advanced radiological detection equipment, detected anomalies that don't correspond to any known element in the periodic table. The soil presents properties that nuclear scientists describe as dimensionally unstable. The readings are impossible, Dr. Sarah Chen, nuclear physicist who secretly led the analysis, reported in a leaked document. Instruments measuring radiation detect frequencies that shouldn't exist. Spectroscopic analysis reveals elements with atomic numbers beyond anything we know. It's as if that soil were contaminated by matter from a parallel reality with different physical constants. High-resolution satellite images obtained by NASA in 2023, as part of a study ostensibly about climate change in Kansas, show that the former Henderson property still presents anomalous characteristics visible from space. Vegetation in the area grows in impossible geometric patterns: perfect concentric circles, straight lines extending for kilometers, and fractal formations that seem to follow advanced mathematical principles. During certain lunar phases, specifically during new moons, infrared sensors from military satellites detect thermal signatures moving through the area in organized formations. The signatures don't correspond to any known terrestrial life form. They move at impossible speeds for native animals, maintain precise geometric formations, and disappear and reappear in distant locations instantaneously. More alarming are contemporary reports of similar activity emerging in other regions of the country. Between 2020 and 2024, federal agencies silently documented at least 12 cases of births classified as anomalous on rural properties built over former Native American ceremonial sites. The mothers in all cases reported identical experiences, nocturnal visitations by shadowy entities before becoming inexplicably pregnant. Dr. Alana Vasquez, anthropology professor at the University of Kansas who obtained limited access to declassified archives through Freedom of Information requests, made a discovery no government agency expected to be made public: GPS coordinates that appear repeatedly in military documents, marking locations where anomalous dimensional activity was detected over 130 years. When I plotted all these coordinates in modern mapping software, Dr. Vasquez revealed in an interview given under anonymity, they form a precise geometric pattern extending across the entire North American continent. It's not random, it's intentional, as if something were using specific points in American territory for some kind of large-scale experiment. The pattern, according to independent mathematical analysis, forms a network of perfect equilateral triangles covering practically the entire continental United States territory. Each intersection point corresponds to a location where paranormal activity related to reproduction was documented, and statistical analysis suggests the pattern is expanding, meaning yes, new points are being activated in a sequence that will follow specific geometric logic. Even more disturbing are the most recent documents in the released files. 2023 observation reports indicate that entities similar to those born in the Henderson family were sighted on indigenous reservations in Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, and Montana, always during new moon nights, always moving in organized groups, always heading toward properties where young women between 16 and 25 years old reside. Hospital records obtained through leaks suggest that in areas where these entities were sighted, there were statistically impossible increases in inexplicable pregnancies among women who maintained proven physical virginity. The resulting gestations follow patterns identical to those documented in the Henderson family over a century ago. The original Henderson property remains under federal control, officially classified as Henderson Environmental Conservation Area. But leaked budget records reveal the site receives classified military funding of over $2.5 million annually, an astronomical value for maintaining a simple conservation area. Unauthorized aerial images show extensive underground structures and equipment suggesting intensive scientific monitoring. Local residents within a 30-kilometer radius around the former Henderson property report that on certain nights, it's still possible to see lights moving through the officially abandoned fields. Lights that move with evident purpose, forming patterns reminiscent of the geometric formations observed in vegetation. Lights that seem to be searching for something specific, or for someone specific. The most recent document in the declassified files is a national security memorandum from October 2023, classified as ultra secret night eyes only. Population genetic analysis in areas of historical entity activity reveals presence of anomalous genetic markers in approximately 0.3% of local population. These markers don't correspond to standard human DNA and appear to have been dormant for multiple generations. Computer modeling suggests that coordinated activation of these markers could result in simultaneous emergence of hybrid population on national scale. It is recommended, the memorandum continues, intensified monitoring of descendants of families resident on properties built over Native American sacred sites. Evidence suggests genetic modifications implemented by nocturnal visitors between 1840 to 1920 may remain viable through multiple generations and be programmed for reactivation at predetermined time. The document's final paragraph contains a revelation that will redefine our understanding of American history. Pattern analysis suggests that the experiment initiated by entities in the 19th century is entering a new phase. Projections indicate that between 2025 to 2030, dormant genetic markers in descendant population will reach critical mass for spontaneous activation. Preparation for national hybrid emergency scenario must be implemented immediately. The question is no longer whether the nocturnal visitors still exist or are active. The question is how many American families carry, without any knowledge, the genetic legacy left by these entities over 130 years ago. And when these silent modifications, programmed to activate at a specific moment, will finally decide to manifest simultaneously on a national scale. After all, the Henderson family believed they had invoked beings for a single desperate ritual. They didn't know they had signed a generational contract that is still being fulfilled. And according to documents from the American government itself, that contract is about to be finalized. Somewhere in rural Kansas, lights still move through abandoned fields. And somewhere in America, women are being visited during moonless nights, carrying a new generation of something that is not entirely human. The experiment is almost complete.